The Irishman was one of the most critically acclaimed movies of 2019 and is considered to be a landmark title due to its release on Netflix and basically starting a fight with the major theater chains. So what did I think of it? Before we get started, click on that red subscribe button and the notification bell, that way you know whenever I post a new video. Compelling characters have always been the beating heart of Martin Scorsese's films. From Taxi Driver to The Wolf of Wall Street, we can't take our eyes off the central character. So in 2019, we finally received his latest film, The Irishman. It has all the hallmarks of a classic Scorsese gangster pick. A cast filled to the brim with Oscar winners, lengthy scenes with mountains of dialogue, and more than a handful of moments of brutal violence and murder. So what makes The Irishman stand out? Sadly, the answer seems to be not a whole lot. For a movie that clocks in at just under 3.5 hours, this one sags for long stretches of time. This is yet another instance of a modern Hollywood film just being flat out too bloated. It's not often that you're getting a fresh out of semi-retirement Joe Pesci teamed up alongside Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, and I got the feeling that the filmmakers knew what they had with this legendary cast and that they were going to milk every single ounce of screen time. I started checking my watch about a third of the way into this thing, which is something that I've never done watching a Scorsese movie. I've seen both Gangs of New York and The Wolf of Wall Street probably a half a dozen times each, and never once worried about the time. Those movies are both very long, but The Irishman feels long. It feels like a grind, and I honestly couldn't wait for the credits to roll. It's okay to be exhausted after a great movie, it happens, but never because you're just flat out bored. We're given some very compelling characters to work with and a narrative that shouldn't be that hard to figure out. Jimmy Hoffa is a famous historical figure, and his murder and disappearance, spoiler alert, should easily make for an exciting and tense story, even if we know that it doesn't end well. Pacino does fine as Hoffa, but nothing about him struck me. I could have gotten up from the sofa and made dinner or tossed in a load of laundry, because this version of Hoffa never kept me glued to my seat. Maybe Hoffa simply isn't as exciting as Jordan Belfort or Bill the Butcher Cutting, but I definitely don't feel like the material was really there to bring this version of Hoffa to life. I think they wanted to make him feel like Frank Costello or Travis Bickle, but I don't think they even came close to succeeding. While Hoffa is a big piece of the story, De Niro's Frank Sheeran is the hook the movie hangs its hat on. His rise from lowly union truck driver to terrifying mob enforcer definitely has its moments of intrigue, but there isn't much new here. The much hyped de-aging technology works fine, even if Sheeran's eyes tend to veer into uncanny valley territory. It's a little strange at first because we know exactly what a younger De Niro looks like. We've seen The Godfather Part 2, but after the first 30 minutes or so, it's not all that distracting. The biggest appeal for me was seeing Joe Pesci's return to the screen. While his role is purposefully understated, he was the standout performance here. His Russell is a man who makes cold decisions with a cautious smile, a mob boss who isn't afraid to bring out the demise of his enemies, but also wants those he holds dear to care for him. His soft spot for Frank and their relationship is something I didn't expect to see, but was pleased that the movie dove into. We also have a nice supporting cast rounded out by Anna Paquin as Frank's daughter, and Harvey Keitel as a Jewish mob boss, among others. These smaller parts weave in and out of the narrative, and the film does a good job showing us bits and pieces of their relationships with Frank. Scorsese has always gotten the most out of the actors who inhabit his creations, and that still works here. The movie just spends way too much time saying what it wants to say, and doesn't seem particularly interested in keeping our attention. It also doesn't seem to actually end up saying all that much. I'll do my best to adequately sum up the problem I have with The Irishman. The filmmakers created a movie that feels like it's constantly having to justify its existence. We get it. Al Pacino is a great actor who hasn't worked with Martin Scorsese before. We get it. Robert De Niro, a great actor who can play this part in his sleep. We get it. Joe Pesci is coming back, his return to the movies. The story of Jimmy Hoffa is fascinating, and I don't have any problem telling that story through the eyes of someone close to him. The problem is that the story wears out its welcome too often and too soon and never fully engages. If you want to craft a solid gangster epic, that's fine. Love it. But you have to do better than Pacino, De Niro, and Pesci doing Pacino, De Niro, and Pesci things for 3.5 hours while I debate in my head whether there's a 10% chance I left the oven on. I mentioned at the top of this review that Scorsese is known for crafting stories with compelling characters. The Irishman has characters that really existed and really did some of these things, but they never jump off the screen like they have in his prior movies, and that's really a shame. I'm a big fan of this director's work, but I can't help feel like this is one of his weakest outings. All of the pieces are there, and this is a confidently crafted cinematic work, but for me, the whole thing just never came together. So should you see The Irishman? If you absolutely must see these three legendary actors chew the scenery together, sure, give it a shot. But I wouldn't bang down any doors to do so. I got up off my couch feeling nothing from this movie and was glad when it was finally over. So that's about as tepid as a recommendation as you're gonna get from me. Thank you so much for checking out the review. If you enjoyed it, click on that red subscribe button. You can also like and share the video since that tells YouTube my channel is worth watching. Sound off down in the comments, let me know what you thought of The Irishman, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 9 a.m.